Good afternoon, Your Honors. This is case number ICTY 0588/2, the prosecutor versus Zdravko Tolimir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would like to call for appearances because it's a very special day or special week. The prosecution first.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, Your Honors. Peter McCloskey and Janet Stewart for the prosecution.
Thank you very much. And the defense? I see Mr. Tolimir is present.
Thank you, Mr. President. Greetings to everybody present. I wish that we have a successful continuation of all this and that everything is completed according to the God's will. Present on behalf of the defense are myself and Mr. Alexander Gajic. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much. This is our first sitting since 21st of February of this year. We are sitting today for the closing arguments in this case. The prosecution and the accused filed their final trial briefs on the 11th of June 2012. I would like to go to a private session just briefly.
We're back in open session, Your Honors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Both final briefs of the parties were translated on an expedited basis by Friday, the 20th of July, as requested by the Chamber. I should like to thank the translation unit, the CLSS, for the special efforts it has made to ensure that the translations were completed before the summer recess. I recall that the prosecution will be presenting its closing arguments today, and the defense will be presenting its closing arguments tomorrow. And that on Thursday, each party has an opportunity to present a rebuttal of 30 minutes duration, if it wishes. This morning there was informal communication from the Chamber to the parties about 15 exhibits, which are at the moment marked for identification. I would invite the parties to be prepared to deal with that matter, to resolve the final administrative problems on Thursday after the end of the closing arguments. Mr. McCloskey, before I invite you to make your submissions, I should remind you that they need to be completed by the end of today. Please bear that in mind. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I first want to tell the trial chamber that it has been an honor to be in front of you, and I thank you for your courtesy and your professionalism. As much as it can be in a case like this, I can tell you it's been a pleasure to be before this tribunal, before this court. It's been a long trial, but you've allowed us, both the prosecution and the defense, to put on our cases. We've not been rushed, and that is more appreciated than you can imagine. I want to thank the defense team of Mr. Gajic, who did a very good job and came on when they were very much needed, the staff of this courtroom, especially the interpreters, and my team, Nelson Thayer, who's not here with us, Kweku Vanderpuye, Rupert Eldricken, Abir Hassan, and of course Janet Stewart. Now the plan today is for me to speak to you for about a third of the time, concentrating on the significant contributions of General Tolimir to the joint criminal enterprise to murder, what we refer to as the murder operation. After me, Kweku Vanderpuye will take roughly 1/3 and discuss the same thing regarding General Tolimir and his responsibility of the forcible transfer charges. The last third will be divided by Rupert Eldricken and Abir Hassan. Mr. Eldricken will speak to you of the opportunistic killings and murders that occurred, and Ms. Hassan will speak to you of the impact of the victims and how that relates to the genocide. So, I will try not to overly repeat what we have said in the trial brief. I do want to address some of the defenses that were brought up, but this is finally a chance for me to put the key factors and evidence in one targeted approach, hopefully within an hour and a half. And so I will be going over some of the most important contributions of General Tolimir. From 13 July through 16 July, and even beyond that, the VRS summarily executed over 7,000 men and boys of Srebrenica. This horrendous crime was ordered by Ratko Mladic and Radovan Karadzic and carried out by elements of the main staff, forces of the Drina Corps, and the forces of several Drina Corps brigades. All of these forces you are by now familiar with, and I won't repeat them here. The murder operation, the JCE to murder the Srebrenica men and boys, was organized and overseen and implemented by the Intelligence and Security Administration of the main staff, led personally by General Tolimir. Organized, overseen, and implemented on the ground by his Chief of Security, Colonel Beata. Beata was assisted on the ground by the Chief of Intel, Colonel Salapura, and main staff Intel officer, Colonel Yankovic. The main staff security worked closely with and professionally supervised the Drina Corps security branch, in particular Colonel Vujadin Popovic, together with the Bratanac and Zvornik Brigade security organs, Captain Momir Nikolic Bratanac, Lieutenant Drago Nikolic, and Milorad Turbic of Zvornik. The murder operation was carried out and implemented with exceptional discipline, organization, and efficiency. In no less than 4 days, the VRS murdered an enormous part of the Srebrenica population of men and boys. And this was largely due to the experience, efficiency, and cold ruthlessness of the security branch and their work with the commanders in carrying this out. General Tolimir must bear responsibility as he led this murderous group. The operation was conducted in a traditional military command according to the principles of the VRS, and the chain of command was strictly adhered to. Without the military organizations working together as they had throughout the war, with well-trained discipline and a solid chain of command, there is no way the VRS could have murdered over 7,000 Muslim men and boys in just 4 days. The adherence of the chain of command and military discipline is what allowed this terrible crime to be committed so quickly and efficiently. The fact that the VRS remained disciplined, organized, and respected procedures in the chain of command is an essential foundation by which all the evidence must be reviewed. It does not, by itself, of course, negate the prosecution's duty to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the contributions of General Tolimir. But once we see this working as it should with the people in the places doing their job, it provides you with a very important foundation by which to judge all the evidence. The defense is, of course, very aware that a functioning chain of command undercuts any defense they have and is something they must attack. And they do. They first do it by quoting Mr. Butler, who very succinctly stated the position. On July 8th, Mr. Butler stated in part, "The fact that a military has been ordered to carry out an unlawful order doesn't mean they're going to carry it out in a non-military manner. A military organization is just that. It's an organization. It operates along a defined structure and hierarchy. He goes on to say, despite the involvement in unlawful acts, the people that a commander needs to involve are those military professionals who by training and by profession are responsible for making certain activities happen within a military organization. Mr. Butler went on to explain General Tolimir's and the main staff responsibilities in their job and tied that into the crimes, as has our brief and has been the focus of most of this case. The defense challenges Mr. Butler and says that that did not happen. In their brief, they say that for a mass murder to be conducted by the VRS, there must have been some deviation in the customary practices in the chain of command. Now, they say that, but then they don't provide us with any deviation. And frankly, we don't see any deviation. The evidence does not reflect a deviation. It's why we spent so much time with the procedures, the rules, the documents, so you could see that this thing was functioning as it should. The only deviation that we see is that instead of caring for the prisoners in their custody as they should and delivering them safely and securely to the Botkovich prison camp, they delivered them to the killing fields of Rahovac and Petkovci and other places where they were in a systematic and organized fashion summarily executed by firing squad. The only thing the defense really tells us is that General Tolimir was in Žepa at the time. Now, of course, there's no deviation. Perhaps we're to infer from the fact that he was in Žepa that he was somehow not involved. But of course, as you know, Žepa is within the Drina Corps zone of responsibility. It's very close, very connected to the Srebrenica events. General Tolimir was within comms the entire time that he was there, and as chief, or the head man of the intel and security of the main staff, he was clearly responsible for the events that were going on in the main staff, as well as his responsibility in Žepa. So by purely saying that he is in Žepa provides no defense whatsoever. And to suggest that he is not involved in the Srebrenica events is a flat-out misstatement by the defense. Or, as we'll go over and see soon, he is constantly writing and making proposals regarding the Srebrenica events and the prisoners that he's learning all about there. Perhaps there is another defense, which we haven't heard, frankly, that Mladic sidelined Tolimir for some reason. We have no reason why. We all know Tolimir is a brilliant strategist, a hard worker. He knows his job better than anybody else. And remember, the witness said, "Lo to the man that keeps information from General Tolimir." The Srebrenica murder operation was one of the most important and critical aspects of this war. Should that secret have gotten out, it could have changed and did change the history of this war. Mladic needed his top man on this. Why on earth would Tolimir have been sidelined? Though they don't say that. I would think it. I would suggest you would think it. There is no reason. They give us no reason. Perhaps there's a suggestion that it is because he is an honorable man, a man of faith that would not be involved in the mass murders. And therefore, he was set aside from this. This is not said anywhere that I could see. But there's one document in this case that destroys that defense. And it's not ever my position to come into this court and judge people personally. That's not what this is about. It's about criminal responsibility. But there's one document in this case that is the most insidious document I have seen in my career here, or that is in this case. And it's drafted by General Tolimir, and it shows the depths, the deprivation that he was willing to go during this war. This is Exhibit P488, and it's one of the few exhibits I want you to take a look at, if we could. You'll remember this is dated 21 July 1995. It is in the middle of the attack on Žepa. A few days before, the Žepa population is forced out. The Žepa troops are holding out. They're in that amazing terrain that you saw, in caves, in ravines, very hard to get at by the VRS. And from his position, here the Rogatica Brigade, Tolimir sends out this proposal personally to General Militic, the chief of operations, and the person that's clearly involved and able to communicate with Mladic and others. You can look briefly at the first 3 paragraphs. Just provides intel information and others. And then Tolimir goes on to say, we believe that it would be more favorable to hold direct negotiations after inflicting losses on the enemy's military personnel. We request the means for crashing the enemy's defense in the sectors of Brezovo, Raven, and Perchici. Well, negotiations from a position of military strength is normal, it's fine. But then, this is what he says. The best way to destroy them would be by using chemical weapons or aerosol grenades and bombs. Using these, we would the fall of Žepa and the surrender of the Muslims. Now, a lot has been made of these chemical weapons. We know, as we all know, this is tear gas. And the tear gas in a combat can be used to ferret these people out of these places and then shoot them down. It's not something that you could tell what the VRS officers we talked to wanted to talk about. But that's not really what I'm talking about here. That's not what concerns me so much. Yes, he wants to use these weapons to ferret people out, and he wants to use what are fuel air explosives, which detonate in the air and can bring people out of these areas, if you recall Mr. Butler's testimony. And he's suggesting this is the best way to take down the army. And then, this is the part that I'm getting to. We believe that we could force the Muslims to surrender sooner if we destroyed groups of Muslim refugees fleeing from the direction of Stublic, Radova, and Berloska Planina. Here he is simply proposing that refugees, civilians, be destroyed in order to get the army to surrender sooner. This is a calculated and vicious and criminal proposal. As you could see from the reaction of the various VRS officers who asked about it. It's not a question of translation. I asked General Obradović to read it and tell us what he said about it. And he said, oh, this means attacking civilians, and that's not what the VRS was about. And then he opined for the first time that this was a misinformation, could be part of a misinformation campaign by General Tolimir to scare the enemy. And that fell apart because, as you know, this is a proposal for chemical weapons. And we saw the chemical weapons come personally to General Krstić through very confidential means. So this is a real document. General Tolimir did not adopt this idea that this is a misinformation. It was a real document. There's nothing in his brief that this is misinformation. This is General Tolimir doing what he feels needs to be done to win the object, get the Muslims defeated and get the population out of Žepa. He is willing to do Mladić's bidding. He's willing to do what it takes. One of the reasons we're here is because in the 20th century, targeting civilians in large scale was a common practice to bring countries to their knees. We're here to stop that. General Tolimir tried to make it happen. I don't know if it happened. We don't know if shells fell on civilians up there, but the fact that he is able to target civilians, women and children, provides a clear indication to you that he is capable of leading an operation to murder the able-bodied men of Srebrenica. There's no reason to bring Tolimir out of the chain of command. He is the man that'll get the job done. He will do what it takes. Now, I'd like to get into the specifics of his involvement. In any human endeavor where people are organized to achieve a particular purpose, be it military, diplomatic, business, academic, legal, or whatever, there are periods of crisis where planning and decision-making and directions become particularly important and intense. And it's during these times that communication is vital. It's also, as we see during these periods of crises or critical phases, that the VRS was most likely to let their guard down and perhaps put in something in a document that they wouldn't have otherwise, or say something over an open line. And so what I've done is I've divided this case into 10 critical phases, roughly along chronology, but I don't want to be bound by a pure chronology, and talk to you about each one of them and General Tolimir's involvement in them. The first critical phase is around that period of 11 and 12 July, when there is a potential for the VRS to capture large numbers of Muslim men and boys in Potocari. And on the 12th of July, that same potential to capture the fleeing Muslims that are going through the woods. Do we see General Tolimir getting involved in this critical phase right before the decision to murder the men from Potocari? Well, the first thing we'd look at is his job responsibility. We're capturing prisoners in large quantities and interrogating them and dealing with them and getting them securely transported. Is that something he fits? Well, of course it is. That's why we spent so much time on the military police, the security job, responsibility to oversee the military police. We see the documents from Popovich, from Bayar, even Tolimir about the military police. Also, well, did Tolimir get involved in large groups of prisoners? And of course he did. We see that from the evidence. Remember, we spent such a long time with Mr. Butler going over the history of General Tolimir and all the various prisoner exchanges he was involved in, from the little to the big, from the beginning of the war onward. So not only is it in his job description, but that up until July 11th, 1995, he'd been doing just that for large numbers of potential prisoners and prisoners. So he should have been involved. Was he? Well, on the evening of 11 July, we know from Momir Nikolic and from the reality of the situation that 1,000 Muslim able-bodied men could be viewed from VRS positions, and this was reported up the intel chain. These were the men that were later separated in the next 2 days. Was Tolimir aware of this? Absolutely. How do we know that? We know that on the 12th of July, the very next day, he traveled by car to Bijeljina, where he met with Todorovic, the East Bosnia Corps security officer, to arrange for 1,000 to 1,200 prisoners' reception at Batković. We know this from Todorovic. We know this from Todorovic's are from Tolimir's driver. So clearly, Tolimir at this point is keyed in on these 1,000 potential folks even before they're separated and arrested. Also, the day of the 12th, we know that the army and the civilians are fleeing through the woods, and this is when the VRS gets a good intel grasp that most of them are heading in the direction of Serska and on towards Tuzla. Does General Tolimir become aware of those folks? Well, the answer is absolutely yes. We know that because he comes back from Bijeljina on the evening of the 12th and stops by the Vlasenica, the Drina Corps headquarters, according to his driver, and we see two documents authored by Tolimir that come out of the headquarters, both of which deal with the subject of these fleeing groups. And he says, and I quote, in the first one, which was exhibit PO 2203, prevent armed Muslims from illegally reaching Tuzla in order to arrest them, of course, meaning to take prisoners. The next document that he sends out shortly after that in the late evening is exhibit D64, and it talks about the same topic and says, and to prevent the withdrawal of enemy soldiers, and I quote, and to capture them. So he is fully involved in knowing about the men in Potocari, the men in the woods. At this point, who is captured and who is not has not really happened yet as far as he knows. And then Popovich sends a report to the Drina Corps saying that they're keeping separated men. And Tolimir should have seen that. And in the same document I just mentioned, we can see that he is aware that men are being separated and kept. Because he says, after talking about capturing men from the column, note down the names of all men fit for military service who are being evacuated from the UNPROFOR base in Potocari. This means he knows the separations and is keeping these men. There would be no reason to note their names down if he is merely referring to men that are being shipped off to Kladan. It serves no purpose to note their names. The men go off to Kladan, they're in the BAIH, the names don't mean anything to them. It's only if they're going to keep them and screen them, which, as is their right, to determine if they're good intel sources, they're perhaps war criminals, they perhaps army that they can keep to exchange. So he knows about that. He knows that their men are being separated, and he sends out this order to note down names. Now, I will comment on what that means in our view relating to his knowledge in the murder operation. And that brings the next critical area, and that is the decision to kill the approximately 1,000 Muslim men that are in Potocari. And there is no evidence in this case that General Tolimir was consulted before that decision was made or that he was involved in the original decision. In fact, the very fact that he suggests that he ordered lists be made is completely inconsistent with a murder operation, because that would create the evidence of the crime, and we never saw lists being made of this murder operation except for a small time in Nova Kasaba when Mladic came and stopped that list being made, as you recall. But in Potocari, with Mladic present, with Popovich present, no lists were ever made. It would not have been made. So that's an indication that by the 12th of July, Tolimir has not been engaged in that. He's been on the road to Bijeljina. He's been up in the East Bosnia Corps, which has not been brought into this as yet. And the one thing we learned from expert Ratko Skrbic that wasn't complete nonsense was that in any operation it's essential to keep it as closely held as possible, and it only goes out when it needs to go out for the operation to succeed. So Mladic and his people in Bratunac, and they hadn't even been able to arrest the people from Potočar yet, don't believe they contacted Tolimir. So at that point, we do not see Tolimir involved. But it is important for your deliberations to determine when the decision to murder the men of Potočari took place. And as you should recall, it's always been the prosecution's position that this happened sometime the late night of 11 July when Mladic and Krstić, Jivanović, Popović were together at the Hotel Fontana, and they found out about these men. And before the 10 o'clock meeting, when Mladic announced that he would be screening men captured in Potočari, men 16 to 70. So clearly, by the morning meeting, when Mladic says men 16 to 70 will be screened, Mladic has made a decision what to do with these men. What was that decision? Well, go to the testimony of Momir Nikolic, it's very clear. Popović, after the meeting, tells him to begin separation processes and identify areas that these men will be killed. Nikolic gives him the name of the Ciglana, the brick factory, the Sase mine. Now, Momir Nikolic, any person that testifies pursuant to a plea agreement that was involved in the events must be viewed with great caution by you. You need to carefully look at everything he says, and it's that material that is corroborated that can be used in your judgment. But in corroborating this kind of evidence, you can look to the entire set of facts and circumstances. One thing to look at in this particular case, the Ciglana brick factory. Look to Deranic's testimony. This is, according to Deranic, was where Beara was trying to kill people on the 14th. And it's no coincidence that Beara is using the brick factory and Momir Nikolic has told Popović to use the brick factory. But fourthly, as a factor in determining when the murder operation occurred is, Mladic says he's going to screen the men for war criminals. There is no screening done. Mladic flat out lied. No significant screening. They did not even minimally keep IDs. IDs were piled up and burned. If you were screening, you would need to get the IDs of the men so you would be able to identify who were men of interest and who were men that could be released. Once they go to Batkovic, they're going to get registered by the ICRC and you're going to lose them. So if you truly want to screen them and be able to get people in order to, God only knows what they would want, what would happen to them, probably the same thing that happened to Polic. But you need to make lists. You should interrogate them. None of that happened in any significant way. This is the factor that you can rely on and you can bank to show that this murder operation was in play, had been decided by the afternoon of 12 July because we see no screening. In addition, the men are treated less than animals. There's little water, just enough to keep them alive. No food, no first aid. They're kept in horrendous conditions, worse than animals. You wouldn't treat an animal that way. They were clearly marked for death. All right, so that brings us to the next critical phase. On the 13th of July, thousands of prisoners, at least 1,000, appear on the road at Kasaba in the morning. These are men that are turning themselves in, as we know. Is Tolimir involved in that? Does he know about that? Like he has with every other group of prisoners or potential prisoners? Yes, absolutely. And we know that Because even though he is in Žepa, that beginning on the morning of the 13th, we have a document, a now famous document, and I want you to see that document. It's Exhibit P-125. This is the document authored by Savcic talking about a proposal that General Tolimir made.
Mr. McCloskey, I think this document is confidential. It should not be broadcast. No, it was a mistake. I was misleaded. Please continue.
It's good to have caution. You'll recall this is the document that from the very beginning the defense has challenged its authenticity. They've said it's a fake. They said it in their trial brief. They said it during trial. They said it in their closing brief. They've repeatedly challenged it. This is a fake. But let's see what it is. We know from the testimony of General Savcic that he and Tolimir are in the morning are in Borike, and that there's discussion over the telephone with Malinic, who's in Kasaba. We have intercepts to that fact about these men that are appearing in large numbers in Kasaba, and that this is a topic of discussion between Tolimir and Savcic, despite the fact that Žepa is due to start on the 14th. Tolimir is completely involved in this and receiving detailed information on it. We know that. Whenever you see a Tolimir document, don't forget it's basing information that he has received. It's not just a one-way street. He doesn't send out these proposals unless he gets the material. We only have a fraction of the material in this case. So he is getting quite a bit of information. Look at the proposal. It's to the commander of the main staff, Mladic, and for the information of General Guerrero, and the commander of the military police, who's Malinic, and it's order. So this is an order. And then it leads with a factual background about the 1,000 members of the former 28th Division that are in the area of Kasaba and under control of the MP Battalion of the 65th Protection Regiment, a main staff asset. And then it says, then Savcic says, Assistant Commander for Security and Intelligence Affairs of the GS-VRS proposes the following measures. Then he lists the 4 proposals, all of which have to do with secrecy, normal secrecy to hide the operation that's going on. But what has always been considered abnormal was this 4th proposal. Once the commander of the military police battalion receives this order, he shall contact General Militic and receive from him additional orders and verify if the proposal has been approved by the commander of the main staff. I'm sorry, I've got the wrong one. I meant 3. The commander of the military police battalion shall take measures to remove war prisoners from the main Milici-Zvornik road, place them somewhere indoors or in an area protected from observation from the ground or air. Now, Savcic told us, as we knew otherwise, that the only people that had access to the air in the daytime was NATO. And so this is a deliberate attempt to hide these large number of prisoners from NATO. And why would they want to do that? Mladic had told Nezamadic early that he had the choice. If they surrendered, they could survive. If they did not, they could disappear. Well, this is Tolimir's effort to be consistent with Mladic's order and make them disappear. We asked Savcic to give us an interpretation of what this would be about. He didn't say it was authentic. He didn't say it was not authentic. And when first asked about this, his explanation was, well, we would have been concerned that NATO would have thought that these large group of people were in fact Serbs and would bomb them. I mean, this is so absurd that this clearly goes to the consciousness of General Savcic, knowing that this is an inculpatory document and he's doing his best under questioning to get away from the truth. That's exactly what General Tolimir's continued allegation that this is a fake is all about. If this is just a document trying to keep military issues secret, why isn't it said so early on and frequently by Savcic, by Tolimir, by anyone? It's not. The one thing you got, finally in the trial brief, oh, if you believe this isn't a fake, well then it doesn't mean anything anyway. There's nothing wrong about it. Well, you can't unring that bell. You can't call this document a fake over and over and over again and ignore the key evidence of a soldier, Danko Gojkovic, who recognized his handwriting and said that this kind of document is the kind of thing he sent. I won't go over all the evidence with you of how genuine this document is. It's immense. We found another document in this collection that was by the same typewriter, the same typewritten. So someone somehow faked two documents, somehow placed them in the Drinacore collection that we ended up finding, or we faked it. I mean, it's absurd. It's a lot of their defense cases full of conspiracy theories and false allegations. This document, this proposal, is a significant contribution to the murder operation, to keep it secret, to keep it quiet. Everything says that. All the factors in this case lead to that conclusion. Now, Butler, if you may recall, felt that the order to put them indoors came from Savcic. However, the four proposals of Tolimir, this is proposal number 3. So in any event, as Mr. Butler said, this document is a joint effort of Tolimir and Savcic to hide those prisoners pursuant to the murder operation. All right, the second known contribution of General Tolimir on the 13th, or perhaps the 14th, was when Tolimir, having, remember, if you recall, going up to Bijeljina to prepare them for the 1,000 to 1,200 prisoners, when Todorovic calls Tolimir and says, where are these people coming? He first told us he did this within about 24 hours of Tolimir arranging it. And since Tolimir arranged it on the 12th, that's about the 13th, maybe 48. So the 13th is the 14th. But it's absolutely clear. Todorovic was clear as a bell. He calls Tolimir because the families of people, Serb relatives that are in custody, desperately want prisoners so they can be exchanges. This is a huge issue that, if you remember, that Todorovic's commander is worried about, and so they call. You know, you don't make preparations for 1,000 people and sit around for days wondering when they're going to be there. So he calls Tolimir, and he speaks to Tolimir. And Tolimir says, it's not going to happen. Drop, and quote, drop all further preparations. This idea has been given up on. This means General Tolimir knows that those prisoners are no longer going to the ICRC camp of Batkovic. He must know about the murder operation. He has to know their fate by this time. And remember, when Todorovic calls 13th, perhaps the 14th, he tried to stretch it on to the 15th. Tolimir clearly will have known about this before Todorovic called. Because Tolimir was the one that was so personally involved in getting to Batkovic, he has to be told and informed and involved in the decision not to send them to Batkovic. And if you recall, the decision to send people to Zvornik was made the afternoon, evening of the 13th of July. In fact, the first group went up on the 13th of July to Zvornik. So there's no way that by the evening, early evening of 13 July, when the VRS has decided to send people to Zvornik to be executed, they have not told General Tolimir. It was his job to get them to Batkovic. Now they're going to their death in Zvornik. He has to be told. So, by the evening of 13 July, There's no doubt now that General Tolimir is fully aware and engaged. He's still in communications. He's still the top man in intel and security. He's at Borike. They even have a line to Bokšinica by the 14th of July. So the next critical phase happens later that evening. First, we have the afternoon when the thousands show up. Surprise enough. By the evening, it's now, according to the VRS intercept and the rough records, 5,000 to 6,000 people in that area. Now remember, they started the killing on the morning of the 13th of July at the Yadar River, where they had an execution squad and a busload of people pulled away from the transportation operation of the women deliberately to kill people along the road. That kind of thing does not happen without the command's involvement. And then later in the day, around 5 o'clock, 5:30, they murder 1,000 people at the Kravica warehouse. And so by the time we have the evening come around, there's 6,000 people, 5,000 to 6,000 people that need to be put indoors. People are dead at the Yadar River. They're lying dead in the Kravica warehouse. Is Tolimir aware of this? Does he know that thousands show up? Absolutely. Absolutely he does. We know that. And remember, they've tried killing people at Yadar. They've tried killing people they have killing people. They've killed people at Kravica. But now they have not 1,500 to 2,000. They've got 6,000 people. And there's internationals going up and down that road. Dutchbat is still trying to get to Kladan. ICRC, MSF, UNMOS. These people are in Bratunac. These people are in Potocari. The world is focused on that particular area. They've got 5,000 people. They've got this huge issue. They've got to get them out of there. We see this. At this critical juncture, look at Daranic again. Daranic is trying to get the Milici people to take these folks. Milici won't have anything to do with it. Beara wants to keep them in Bratunac and kill them. There's a huge fight between Daranic and Beara on that point. Remember the intercept between Karadzic and Daranic, where Karadzic is saying, get those people out in warehouses outside. It's clearly the thousands that they're talking about. And they finally decide, as Beara sends Momir up to Zvornik, that they get them to Zvornik. Well, is Tolimir engaged in this controversy and this critical decision on how to best dispose of these 6,000 alive people that they can't possibly murder in Bratunac? Of course he is. He's been made aware of every other movement of prisoners. So of course he is, and we know absolutely the defense acknowledges this because of the next document. This is a document, I don't think you need to see it, but it's late night, the 13th of July, and it's a document that, as you recall, security officer from Rogatica, Charkic, said he took his dictation from Tolimir. There's no way they could call that a fake. And it's Tolimir's proposal to move 800 people from the Kasaba area down to Shemots to do farm work. Now, you heard from the logistics officer, Rajalots. There was no farm work to be done in that area at that time of year. That was nonsense. That was Tolimir's internal covering himself and covering him, which he did frequently. You'll see plenty of documents. We'll get to the famous September document where he criticizes the VRS for not taking enough prisoners, knowing all the prisoners that were taken by the Drina Corps. He throws in the Geneva Conventions when he doesn't mean it. Well, this was an internal security designation to hide his true intention. Basically, move 800 people secretly down to Rogatica to try to relieve the burden off Zvornik and Bratunac and to enter into this. It's personally to Guevara. So, and remember, Yada River at this time dead. Kravica, dead. Probably 100 people around the Vuk Heritage School dead. And who is implementing this but Beara, Salapur, Yankovic, Popovic, all the whole security branches. So by the evening, late evening of 13 July, when Tolimir admittedly sends this document down, he is fully engaged. And this document, I wouldn't be surprised if we found a mass grave down there someday, but we do not have any evidence that this proposal was taken up on. But that is planning. It's part of the planning process. When senior officers make proposals to do things, it's part of the planning. It's pursuant to the murder operation. Whether the 800 are designed to be killed or not, he knows the rest are going to be killed. And all the 800 were killed. But this is where it gets absurd. Of course he knows, and he's engaged, and he's writing about it, and he's receiving information on it. The defense's explanation for this is that, oh, this is just him making his effort to give them adequate accommodations, some such thing. When you saw those awful Kravica, worse than Kravica warehouse-like buildings, barely good enough for animals, if that. And that's exactly the kind of place people were stored and butchered. Tolimir got intel from Charkic or the commander and was able to fill that in. I think he says in his brief, oh no, it's not those places, it's the houses along the road. 800 people are going to fit in those houses? This is absurd. I'm surprised they even suggested as much. All right, the next critical phase, now that by the evening of the 13th, the decision's been made, everyone's going to Zvornik. The next day is the first day for the Žepa attack. Tolimir is there. He's at Borica. He's overseeing it. Now, Krstić, remember, is commanding that attack, so Tolimir is not an active combat commander. No one's ever said he was. But he is there. What is one of the first things he does? Does it have to do with Žepa? No, it's Srebrenica. Exhibit P-124 is a document that he sends out to the Drina Corps saying, we have received information that unmanned aircraft are flying above the Srebrenica, Žepa, and Gorazde enclaves. The next exhibit is P-128, and he sends it to the Bratanac Brigade, the Zvornik Brigade, all Drina Corps brigades, and it's an order to shoot down that unmanned aircraft that is recording. Well, what's going on up there around Srebrenica on the morning of the 14th that Tolimir would know about? Well, militarily, the Bratanac Brigade is going through the woods, mopping up, trying to find any remaining Muslims. Is this going to be seen from the air? No. Men running around in the woods like that. But what else is happening? There's a huge convoy containing 6,000 men that's gearing up and driving off from Bratanac to Zvornik the morning of the 14th. Also, the morning of the 14th, they're finishing off people at the Kravica warehouse, bringing in a bulldozer, scraping the remains of the people up, and making a big pit at Lagova. Also, you've seen yourself that can be seen from the air. And of course, we know what goes on in Zvornik that day at the 14th at Orahovac. So Tolimir's order to shoot down this plane that is recording images over the killing fields is a significant contribution to the murder operation. He knows unquestionably that this is happening, and despite that this is the first day of the attack, he's still focused on Srebrenica. And this is the tip of the iceberg. What other information is he getting? Now, at this period of time, which, just to remind you, our critical point was the job of secretly executing and burying thousands of prisoners as soon as possible, 14 through 16 July. He issues the order to shoot down the unmanned aircraft. We don't hear from him much after that, but we know that Beara, Popovich, the security branch, Salapura, are organizing and implementing the murder operations in Zvornik, at Orahovac, at Petkovci during this time. And there is a document, I won't put it up on the screen, it's an exhibit in the case that shows all the security branch personnel at all the crime scenes during these days. And Beara is leading it from the headquarters of the Zvornik Brigade and is on the ground. Popovich is all over the place, as are Nikolic and Turbic. Tolimir is leading it from Žepa. The other thing I won't spend a lot of time on, but on the 14th, Tolimir is within communications. And we know from the evidence that on the early of the 14th of July, Salapura called the Zvornik Brigade duty officer and left a message that Drago and Beara are to report to Golic. That's got to be Drago Nikolic. We know who Beara is. Pavle Golic is the intel officer at the Drina Corps in Vlasenica, who is coordinating communications of the murder operation. So there's no way Salapura is passing on messages to Beara without Salapura being involved in the murder operation. Clearly, we know Beara and Drago are. And information is being focused on Golic at the Drina Corps Brigade, which in turn goes, of course, to the main staff. And Tolimir has access to the main staff information at all times from where he is. That's been clear. Spent a lot of time on that in the brief, and you'll see that the communications show that. Salapura says he doesn't remember this call, but he doesn't contest it and suggests he received the information from Mladic, but he says it should have gone through the staff, meaning, of course, Tolimir. On the evening of the 14th of July, the Zvornik Brigade receives a call and a message that Beara is to call 155. So the evening of all these mass executions going on in Orahovac and Petkovci, there's a call to call 155. And I'm sure you remember 155 is the line that is picked up by the operations room in the main staff. This is a room that Tolimir is eminently familiar with, can access from Borica, from Bosnica, from Rogatica, from the forward command post at Krivace. He's also got portable radios that he's called in. This is where the hub of information now is, and Beara is having to report, naturally. Beara is the subordinate of Tolimir. Tolimir suggests merely that Beara is, that he does not oversee Beara, that he does not command Beara. He just says it with no backup. Completely disregards the testimony of Obradovic and Milovanovic, who clearly establish that as the top man at Intel and Security, Tolimir is the commander of his staff. Beara, Salapura, Yankovic, as other assistant commanders are the commanders of their staffs. They're not military combat commanders, but they are commanders. They have the right to order. They're responsible for the work of those people. They don't deal with that at all. Maybe we'll hear something today about that. They make this bold conclusion, but then it's completely contradicted by all the evidence. All right. Number 6. The critical event that's now occurring over the period of 14 and 15 July is that the job of executing 1,500 prisoners in Pilica has been delayed. They have had to spend the nights of the 14th and 15th in Pilica without men to execute them. Remember, we have Beara at the Zvornik Brigade calling Jivanovic first and then calling Krstic and trying to get men that Mladic had ordered to come to the execution sites. That's because they were able to kill the people at Orahovac on the 14th. The night of the 15th, they killed the people at Petkovci. The day of the 15th, they killed the people at Rocevic, at Kozluk. But the 15th goes by with nobody of the 1,500 men that are rotting, literally, in the Pilica school and the Pilica dome. They're going on their second night, the night of the 15th, in this squalor, unexecuted, and Beara is fit to be tied, as you can tell by looking at that. Why doesn't Beara call his commander, his boss, Tolimir? Well, Tolimir is not a military commander. He does not control troops. Tolimir can get on the line to Krstić or Mladić and say that the commander has ordered you get it to them, but it's easier for Beara, who's in the Zvornik brigade, to go directly to the Drina Corps and get Jivanovic and Krstić, who are commanders, who do have the right to control troops. That's why he goes there. But of course Tolimir is going to be abreast of this. Mladić is in Belgrade. This needs to be happen. Every day that 1,500 men go without it being executed is a day longer that this thing could be exposed. So this is a very, very difficult situation they're facing. You remember the Pilica official comes down and complains to the Zvornik brigade. It's a mess. Who do they get to solve this problem? The 10th Sabotage Detachment, controlled by the intel section, Salapura, who is controlled by Tolimir. Of course, Tolimir gave his approval for the 10th Sabotage, fully aware and know of it. It's Mladic's unit, of course, but it's controlled and dealt with by Tolimir. Mladić doesn't have time to deal with the units that he's dealing with. Mladić is in Belgrade. Of course, Tolimir was informed of this. Something this major, this big a problem, has to take precedence for Tolimir, and the 10th Sabotage were his people. They get sent over, and they do the job on the 16th. Also on the 16th, the main staff orders the Drina Corps to continue the murders at Pilica. Remember, we have an intercept. Serovic, probably the duty officer at the Drina Corps, says to Beara that Turkula, the main staff officer, I think for artillery, Turkula was just here and wants triage to be, and is passing on from above. The triage needs to be done on the prisoners in Pilica. Then we have the intercept where Beara and Serovic get on the phone, and Serovic is telling Beara this. Beara says, don't talk about it over the phone. So we have Turkula coming from the main staff on the 16th, telling the Drina Corps to make sure those prisoners are killed. Tolimir has full access to the main staff and the information. In fact, I'm sure is coordinating it in the efforts of his subordinates on the 16th. Later on in the evening, Tolimir goes to Crna Rijeka. We know this from Kaserovic. This is critical testimony. Kaserovic gave us a statement early on, before really understanding how it was going to be used. Tolimir is there. Mladić is there. And according to Kaserovic, Tolimir is advising him and talking with Mladić about reducing Kaserovic's task and going to command troops for a sweep operation in Bratunac the next day. Well, what does that mean? The evening of 16 July, 7,000 Muslims are almost dead. I'm sure hundreds are still dying of their wounds on the killing fields of Branjevo and in the squalor of the Pilica Dome. But there is Mladić and Tolimir at Crna Rijeka, and Tolimir, there's no question, is briefing Mladić on what's happened. Tolimir has to know what's gone on. He's got the information from the main staff, the ops room has gotten it from the Drina Corps. He's briefing Mladić. It's a critical contribution to the murder operation. He's also briefing Kaserovic on how to deal with Jankovic, who he knows is in Bratunac. But very importantly, remember, Kaserovic said to us, oh, Tolimir told me Beara was in the Drina zone. In the interview, which is in evidence, Kaserovic said, Tolimir told us Beara was at the Drina Corps headquarters. So Tolimir is not only briefing Kaserovic on what Jankovic is up to, he's briefing him on Beara, the man that they won't even talk about. Another outrageous point in the brief. Oh, Bayara, we're not going to talk about Bayara. Naval Captain Bayara, as if the fact that he's a naval captain means something. Here is direct evidence that Tolimir is aware that Bayara is in the heart of darkness in the Vlasenica Brigade on the key night of the 16th when people are dead and dying all over Pilica. And they're thinking about killing these poor MSF workers. I won't go through all the detail on that. But I refer to that as part 7 is the job post 16 July. What to do with the Muslim men in Bratunac and who should be executed and who should not be. I'll merely remind you of the documents Yankovic wrote explaining this problem, what do we do with the MSF, and that amazing and outrageous intercept where Djurdjic, the person that deals with internationals, says to Yankovic over the phone, well, are they able-bodied? Well, yes. He goes, well, you know what the procedure was. You were in Bratunac the previous days. And they get in an argument about it. And it ends with, wait until Tosho gets there. He and the commander will decide. It's about the third reference to Tolimir being involved in this whole situation where MSF can come involved. So they're clearly going through Tolimir, for these issues. This, again, is part of the planning, even though, thank God, these MSF workers were not killed. Tolimir was involved in the planning and in the discussions on their fate and very smartly decides not to kill them because it's his job to keep this thing secret. You go and kill 15 MSF workers that were sitting with Dutch Bat and this organization and ICRC. I mean, it really makes things obvious. Tolimir had to put the lid on that, and I'm sure he did. All right. Point 8. The job to receive, transport, and kill 30 or more Muslims captured in Serbia and returned to Popovic on the 22nd, 23rd July. You'll remember the documents and the material showing that people tried to escape to Serbia and got grabbed and sent back. There was Muslims that actually cut themselves to try to stay. They were given through the Bratunac Brigade to Popovic. And on the 23rd of July, Popovic got the 10th sabotage and murdered them. On the 22nd of July, Popovic does something unusual. It was stupid, insecure. He gets on an insecure line and he calls Tolimir directly. The only reason he was stupid enough to do this was because it was a family issue. He had a cousin that was captured and he wanted to go directly to Tolimir to get the information. But in that conversation, he says, oh, I'm doing work. Now, this is the work he's doing. He's about ready to butcher 30 people. And he's gone over to the Zvornik Brigade that day, and I believe that's when he picks up the Milici patients. So Popovic is a very busy guy, and there's only one thing he's doing, and that's killing people. Tolimir tells him, keep up the work, something to that effect. Tolimir fully engaged with the knowledge of this operation now, knows precisely what Popovic is doing, and issues him the comment, keep doing your work. This is another clear contribution. Number 9, the job to continue to hide and cover up the murder operation and the continued murders. Those murders, as they're charged in the indictment, are at Nezuk, Snagovo. Those two are people that get captured, just a small number, and they get shot by the soldiers that are there. No real reason to believe that Tolimir is going to be aware of that or in on those particular small level murders, but that it is a clear indication that the murder operation, if they can get away with killing people, they will, and they do. The evidence on Nezuk and Snagovo is clear. The Milici patients, some 10 to 15 seriously injured patients. I bring them up because if you look at the documents and how they got transferred from Milici to the Zvornik Hospital, to the Zvornik Brigade, to Popovic on the 23rd, the main staff medical officer was involved in the approving of that transfer. To murder seriously injured patients that have been seen by 2 hospitals and are still alive on the 23rd is an outrageous decision that could only have been made at the highest levels. Mladic, Tolimir, they have to know about that. The 4 Branjevo farm survivors, if you recall, the 4 folks that were helped by the 2 Serb soldiers were given an apple and a sandwich and told where the front lines were. Then they were captured and confessed that they were helped by these 2 Serbs. Well, Drago Nikolic, Vinko Pandurovic, General Tolimir prosecuted those 2 Serb farmers, soldiers, for helping the enemy. And they used the statements of those 4 guys to prosecute them and punish them. And those 4 guys, we have their names, have never been seen since. They got murdered. They're part of the official record of that case. There's no way that happened. That kind of thing has not happened without a green light given to it at the highest level. I don't know if he knew about that in particular. But it's the kind of thing that his army was doing throughout this time period. The Scorpions. The Scorpions are a unit that were working with the MUP and Turnovo. The MUP was under the command of the army. And the MUP were working with the MUP. Or, excuse me, the Scorpions were working with, was Borovčan's outfit, actually. They send Srebrenica victims all the way across Bosnia. And then they're murdered by the Serbian MUP unit who happens to be working with the VRS and RS forces. There's no way you send that many people across the country to be murdered by a foreign unit or a unit from the Republika Krajina without the main staff knowing and without Tolimir knowing. Mr. Eldekern will talk about Polic. People were killed in the woods. There's one document that's particularly disturbing. It's P00755. It's a daily combat report of Rajko Kusic. And in that he basically says, today we liquidated several Muslims, and from them we learned the following. And then he gives their location and what they were doing. They clearly captured people, got information from them, and then murdered them, and then reported that up the chain to the Drina Corps command. Talk about impunity. This kind of thing does not happen unless it's part of the ongoing process of the Drina Corps and of the main staff. Now, that brings me to an end of my 10 critical points. I could talk about the other issues, the other factors involved, but I wanted to be able to tell that to you in a compact form as it's been in my head all these years. And as you go over this material and think about it and understand it, please don't forget, this army is working. It's working according to the chain of command. Tolimir is at its head. He's fully engaged, even from Žepa. He is involved. Now, I think it's a good time to take a break. We'll get Mr. van der Pooijen here. I hope to have just a few minutes at the end to wrap this up. Or perhaps we can wait for the rebuttal which you have kindly offered us. But if we could take the break now, Mr. President, it would be great.
Thank you very much, Mr. McCloskey. We will have our first break now and resume with the submission by Mr. van der Pooijen after the break at 4:05. We adjourn.
All rise, faithful away.